What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another Angle of Pursuit podcast, your fantasy football, sports betting, and NASCAR home here at fakepigskin.com. I am your host, Kyle Robert. You follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. With me once again, it's Brian Twining. What's up, Brian?
What's going on, Kyle? What in the world is happening? Baseball is starting soon, but there's NASCAR on the same day of baseball's new opening day?
We're like almost to the point where we're gonna have all the sports, and like I legitimately could not be more excited. Basketball's supposedly coming, hockey's coming, baseball's here. I watched a baseball game last night.
Oh, no.
NASCAR's on Thursday, which is why we're recording a little early. So we wanted to get it into your YouTube feed so you can watch it. That's why it's really important that you subscribe, that you turn on notifications, because when we drop a new episode, you guys don't miss out on a thing. So NASCAR is Thursday this week, not on the weekend. I'm not really sure why, but we're here to give you our best bets because that's what we care about. Brian, we are going to talk Kansas Motor Speedway. We are going to talk the Superstart Batteries 400. But before we go forward, I want to take a little trip back to Sunday. I got a couple shout outs and we'll throw in some nuggets in between. I want to shout out first Ethan Wallace called Kurt Busch for top 5. Shouts to you, my friend. That's a winner. They're not as easy to come by as one might want to think. So for hitting that, props to you. I also want to give props to OG. Like, dude had Kurt Busch for top 3 and Eric Jones for top 5. Busch finished 4th, Jones finished 6th. That is a bad beat. You should have probably got at least one of those. And as my co-host will tell you, Eric Jones top 5 was basically there until it wasn't. So that was definitely a frustrating end to Sunday's race. But you're clearly on the right path, and you're clearly putting 2 and 2 together to get 4.5 instead of 4. So hopefully we can be the difference, get you guys where you need to go. And as I forget who was in our Jesse, your call on Daniel Suarez is right. Like we just need to stop going back to that well. It's not happening.
It just seems sometimes the odds are just too good to pass up, and it's apparently he's not the same guy.
Yeah. And
like
this is a
like
guy
they mentioned, he's in a new car. So
yeah, that definitely doesn't help. But there's something going on there because he has the potential to be. I don't think he's going to win a ton of races, but be in the conversation and make some noise and cash some top 10 bets. But that's not happening. So we're going to stop doing that to ourselves and lighting money on fire. So, Brian, this week, let's head to Kansas. Let's talk the Superstar Batteries 400. And I want to start, like we always do, with our favorite option inside 10 to 1. And I don't know about you, but I feel like this week's a very pound the top of the board week. There's not a ton of value. There's a couple guys we'll get into that we like, top 5, top 10 type bets. But this week we're going to start inside that top 10. So if you don't mind, I'll take the T and we'll talk some Chase Elliott at plus 6.5. Obviously a guy who has success at this track on his last 6 trips, has a win, has 4 top 4s, has led 93 laps, has, obviously had one where he didn't race so well, but for the most part has done really well in terms of average finishes, has the 3rd best average finish over the last 6 races. I don't traditionally love going this high on the board, but I feel like he is running well in his last few races, has the trend of success, and at plus 6.5, like I said, I don't love it, but is interesting and in basically 2 to 1 for a top 3. So I will be targeting Chase Elliott this week.
Yeah, he was the first guy that I kind of looked at, because I almost never look at the top guy on the board as the favorite. Like in a sport where there's 40 different drivers with the potential to win. I mean, not all of them have the chance of winning, but when there's 40 different guys, I'm not looking at the top guy. And Elliott, as you mentioned, 3 of his last 4 races, he's finished 4th, 11th, and 12th. And he won that all-star race, so he's been running really well. Last week, he was consistently within the top 10, even like top 7 throughout the race. He wound up finishing 12th. So he's been running really good. He's got a really good history at this track. So he was a guy that I liked as well.
Let's move on to another guy in that top 10 range. As we mentioned, we really like that top of the board, and won't be diving too far for some of these outrights. And go with one of the guys that you like, and that's Ryan Blaney at 7-1. I can't disagree with you either.
I mean, this is going against what kind of like I've been looking at as far as trends going into tracks, as he hasn't traditionally done well here. He's averaging finishing around 20th place in his last 5 at this track, but I mean, he's been hot in the 2020 season going into this race, and I mean, he's currently second in the standings. He's third behind only Harvick and the co-favorite this week, Chase Elliott, in fastest laps this season at 353. I mean, every race he's constantly being mentioned as a guy who's running extremely quick. He's held a lead. I found this stat to be pretty interesting in 14 of the 18 races this season. So, I mean, if you have a driver who at any point in a race can get into the front of the pack and get that clean air, he's giving himself the opportunity of winning. He's constantly running in the top third of the field. Like, he's never really dropping past 15th or so in driving. Like, his average running position is around 15th or 16th, and 90% of his laps over the last 2 races have been in 15th or better. So, I mean, he's in the position to win races. So, looking at a race of a guy who's really hot in 2020, not necessarily what he's done here. I just think of his trend right now is a guy who you can pick on as, he's lower on the board as far as the favorites than the rest of them. And he started to creep up because he opened at 8-1. So people are starting to hammer him right now.
Yeah.
So that's why he kind of stood out to me.
No, I totally agree. And it's the same kind of logic I used last or a couple weeks ago when I was all over Eric Almirola. I think it makes a ton of sense. Finding drivers that are trending in the right direction and that are performing well, and maybe they haven't had the success you're looking for at the specific track, but they might be evolving into better drivers and kind of becoming somebody who's kind of ready to take that next step and that next leap. So I like that call quite a bit, and as you mentioned, his number shrinking, that's usually a good sign. That usually means the smart people are finding ways to back him. So I like that call quite a bit. The other guy in this kind of range that I like is Denny Hamlin, 8-1. Obviously has success at this track. Pull up his numbers here. A consistent running of 3 top 5s in his last 6. Has a win. He's one of a handful. There's probably 4 or 5 drivers that have gotten a win at this track over the last 6 trips. He's a guy that obviously last week was a very frustrating finish. Didn't go quite the way he expected to. So I look for him to rebound in a big way. And for a guy that has the success he has a victory at this track, for him to be 8-1, basically like what, the 5th or 6th best odds or lowest odds, that seems a little mispriced. He should probably be in like the 6-1 range instead of 8-1. So I'll take that value. I'll hope that it pans out, and I'm hoping that history kind of repeats itself. He's another guy that a top 3, a top 5, I think would make a ton of sense on as well. If you want to reduce your risk a little bit and still have a nice payday.
Unless you're like OG and you pick that top 3 and he finishes 4th.
Yep. Yeah. Then you're hating life. But OG, I got a feeling is going to bounce back in a big way this week. Let's dive a little deeper. Let's talk a couple names. And we'll start with the familiar name, and that's Eric Jones, 25-1. I don't know if either of us will be backing him for an outright win. But this is a guy with a couple top 5s in his last 6 trips. Like a top 5, I think would make a lot of sense. Potentially a top 3. He's 6-1 for top 3. The top 5 odds haven't been released at time of recording, but I'm guessing he's going to be like 2 or 3-1. He's kind of consistently 25-1 during the race, 6-1 for top 3, and plus 275, plus 300 for top 5. So I would look at top 3. I would look at top 5 for him. another guy that's running well, has some decent history at the track, and I think is kind of putting himself in position to be in that top third of NASCAR drivers on a week-to-week basis, and is somebody I definitely like.
Yeah, I mean, we've consistently backed Jones on a week-to-week basis. Like I'm finding myself constantly making driver bets with him versus so and so, or and those are almost always paying out. I also had Eric Jones top 5, so it was a pretty disappointing finish at Texas Motor Speedway. But I mean, he's a guy who was kind of in that Eric Almirola conversation right now, where they're just running so well that pretty much it doesn't, like, you can take the current track out of the scenario and just kind of look at how well they're running and place a wager top 5 and you go a little bit riskier top 3 with them.
Yeah, and I like the idea of, especially on a week like this where you don't really love the guys farther down the board, looking at some of those group matchups, looking at some of those head-to-head matchups, and seeing if you can find value there. If you really like Ryan Blaney, if you really like Eric Jones, Denny Hamlin, finding ways to take advantage of them without them having to win the race, I think sometimes is a good way to look as well. If we want to go a little more deeper, let's talk about your guy. A guy that I feel like we've both targeted on this podcast a few times. And that's Clint Boyer. Obviously at 50-1. I don't know if either of us are going that far. But a top 3 of 12-1, a top 5 is probably going to be like 5 or 6-1. That's something I can definitely get behind.
Yeah, I mean, he also doesn't have the greatest history at this track, but he has 2 consecutive top 10s of an 8th and a 5th place finish, I believe, here. If we're looking back into this current season, his average finish over his last 5 races is 12th or is 11th. So I mean, he's been running really well near the top of the field, and just taking luck into the scenario where my guy last week, William Byron, had been running really well until he got crashed twice near the end of the race, which ended his day. Factoring in Clint Boyer's success and ability to finish races this year, where only one time he's not been able to finish a race because of a crash. So he's running every lap. He's been a good driver this year. He's consistently running near the top 10. And for him to be able to sneak into that top 10 range and get a 3rd consecutive top 10 finisher, that's like one of the safest bets of the week.
Yep. And you're getting a nice number on it. Like, I'd much rather take Clint Boyer at 6 or 7-1 than to get in that top 5 conversation than some of the other guys that we've kind of dabbled in. But at the top of the board is where you're going to find your money this week, I think. And there's certain races that's just the case. Obviously, once the restart happened, that was something that happened to be the case. We kind of, depending on what track you get to, it gets a little crazier. You can find value, but we're back to that. So, Brian,
I did want to mention our boy Joey Logano finally put together a consistent race and finished third.
I thought he was going to finish it all for me. I thought he was going to win it.
He had it there.
Dude. Yeah, that at the end didn't go as well as I thought. But yeah, no, he was definitely in the mix and definitely lived up to some of my expectations. As always, if you want to make sure you get these pods, make sure you're subscribed, make sure you turned on the little bell, make sure you're letting us know in the comments who you like, top 3, top 5, head to head, whatever you find, wherever you're putting your money this week. Let us know. If you hit a winner, we'll shout you out next week. We'll give you your props. We'll throw everything that's due your way. But Brian, before we get out of here, before we get on to the rest of our shows, what's your best bet for the week?
I'm going to go a little risky here because I really like him this week, but I'm going to go with Clint Boyer at the top 5 number that we have yet to see, whether that be 6.5-1, 6-1. Like, I really like Boyer's chances this week at a top 5 finish.
I like it a lot. I'm going to go with a top 3 finish, and I'm going to take Mr. Denny Hamlin. He's plus 225 for a top 3. As nice as I would like, obviously an 8-1 would be nice. Being able to have that wiggle room, as some of our listeners have found out, as we have found out,
yes,
being able to have that extra spot or 2 could mean the difference between cashing and not cashing. So I'm going to back Hamlin for a top 3 at plus 225. Like I said, if you let us know in the comments below your favorite driver for the week, your favorite bet for the week, and we will be back before next Sunday's race. So probably Wednesday or Thursday. But if you if you hit the subscribe button, thanks to all of our new subscribers, we've gained a few over the past couple weeks. So we really appreciate you guys hopping on and enjoying the show. We will be back with fantasy football content, more sports betting content, as Brian mentioned, with baseball and basketball and all that stuff coming back. But for Brian Twining, I'm Kyle Robert, and we'll talk to you guys next time.
Peace.